For the second time in as many weeks, I get to bring props to the OHL podcast. I don't know if you saw what happened in Windsor this week, Dan. Thursday night at the WFCU Center this past Thursday. During the intermission, the Zambonis are out, plural, because we use two now to get through those intermissions quicker, get the ice scraped, etc. Not one, but both break down. And they're finishing the scrape and the cleaning up of the snow manually. So what you need there in Windsor, okay, check out this beauty. Here is the Olympia ice resurfacing machine. I have the little model here at my home in Kitchener because these Olympia ice resurfacing machines are made right in the region of Waterloo, in the beautiful town of Elmira. That's what we need in OHL rinks. I've been telling rinks in Kitchener and Waterloo and Cambridge. Waterloo uses them at one of their rinks, but I don't know why, especially with elbows up, buy local crap these days, that not every rink, at least in the region of Waterloo, has an Olympia ice resurfacing machine. But Windsor, if you're looking for something, reach out to your buddy Farwell. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. I'll get you to the Schlupp family there. A bunch of beauties at Resurface in Elmira. We'll get you in Olympia.
Yeah, and with the props, you are now the carrot top of podcast hosts. Like, I
That's where you went with that.
I just the props. You're a prop host.
There are a lot of differences between Carrot Top and me, but the props I'll give you. I had a chance to go out to Resurface Corp in Elmira about a year ago and see how they do their business. Got up close and personal with the Olympia ice resurfacers. Got to drive one around, baby. Oh yeah, tooling around the parking lot. Like, I'll tell you what. Hey, Windsor, you need somebody. You want a new ice resurfacing machine? Get an Olympia, and I'll come drive it for you because I'm licensed now. You see, Dan. Not only do I have props, I have ideas on this podcast.
Well, I'm pretty sure Windsor liked it up until that last idea, but nevertheless,
fair. I'm not sure we've had a roll call from Windsor yet either. I thought they liked us over there. Maybe I'm realizing why.
I did get one last week offline,
That's right.
Mike. So
you said that.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. And yes, for those of you who have checked in comments on the audio version of the podcast, we had Brantford and Guelph representing on the audio pod. Lots of comments on our YouTube channel. We've pretty much covered every market now, but we always like to hear where it is you're checking in from. So drop us a note and let us know. Use the email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Leave a comment on YouTube or on the audio channel where you listen to this podcast, and let us know which OHL market you are in, or maybe the wannabe OHL market that you're in. We love hearing from our OHL podcast family. And just one more quick thing on Windsor before we get into the meat and potatoes this week. You might remember the story we told you last year, and it came from a fan in Brantford, which made it so much more special, at least to us. The Spitfires in Brantford playing the Bulldogs. Spitfires laying a whooping on Brantford, but Joey Castanzo, goaltender for the Spits, was having a little bit of fun with a young fan at the glass who just so happened to be there with a walker. It's an area that the Brantford Civic Center, the TD Brantford Civic Center or Brantford TD Civic, I don't know, they got TD in there now. Anyway, they reserve for disabled folks, and this young fella who was in that spot, he and Castanzo developed a bit of a rapport during the game. There were check-ins during stoppages, and at the end of the game, Joey Castanzo gave the kid a signed goalie stick. Imagine that, the visiting goaltender in Brantford, and that story from a Brantford fan. Well, we're going to take it up another notch with another Castanzo story, but we'll get to that later in this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. The $200 million, 5,800-seat Greater Sudbury Event Center. Ground has been broken, and look out, according to team owner Dario Zulik, this is going to be the best rink in the OHL, at least for a while.
Yeah, and it reminded me, last time I was in Sudbury was actually a few years ago now, about 3 years ago, but I ran into someone up there at the time at the rink who said, ground will never get broken on this thing. They've been talking about forever, it's never going to happen. And I remember at the time, didn't want to be the cynic as well, but thinking, wow, is this the sentiment around here? This has been a discussion for, 20 years. Well, ground has been broken. And when ground has been broken, it's coming, folks. And, as much as I love that old barn, I think it's time. And with the goings on in the OHL of late, especially with Commissioner Crawford's kind of warning to those with substandard facilities, well, Sudbury, you're no longer going to have to worry. So great news for Sudbury.
One of the oldest rinks in the league. I believe Kitchener just opened a few months before Sudbury officially opened, but they both have the opening year of 1951, so almost 75 years. And the new one in Sudbury won't be ready until 2028, so it'll be north of 75 years old by the time the current Sudbury Arena is decommissioned. The city hasn't figured out what it's going to do with that space yet, but the new one is being built directly across the street. So you're going to the same area. And I think that's where the cynicism came from, Dan. You talk about, being up there and running into fans who were saying, I don't think this is ever going to happen. This was a long and drawn out affair because there's another area of Sudbury where there's a lot going on in terms of development. And the idea was to put the arena out there and take it out of the downtown. And they even invested money in that and got started down that path. But eventually settled on back in the downtown area. And here we are now getting ready to move forward with the, as I said, $200 million project for the Sudbury Wolves and the Sudbury Five in the, what do they call that? The Super Basketball League or the Basketball Super League.
Yes. Yeah, and I had someone else comment too that, well, $200 million, is that what these things cost now? I said, actually, that price tag sounded pretty reasonable to me based on some of the other price tags I've heard. So I think all things considered, it's a good step.
$200 million. There's the message to those other markets. And if that's the cost right now in Sudbury as they get this underway, these things don't get any less expensive to build as time goes on. So kudos to Sudbury. Can't wait to see it, although the romantic in me will miss, the sentimentalist in me will miss that old building. And it's time marches on. And I hope they take the wolf with them. Can we just make sure that happens? Like, get that wolf, same wire, same mangy wolf, put it up in the new Greater Sudbury Event Center. You got to do it.
That better be written in the deal. It better be. That thing's got to go.
Must come with
yes.
Wolf. Something else from the league this week in the city that we call home, Dan. The Kitchener Rangers have introduced the level of legacy, and the inaugural members, I don't think anybody is going to criticize. Pete DeBoer, Memorial Cup winning coach, and Brian Bellows, Memorial Cup winning captain of the Kitchener Rangers. DeBoer this November, I think for Bellows it's in February, but either way, those two players will be recognized before games this season with the Kitchener Rangers as the inaugural members of the level of legacy at the Memorial Auditorium. What do you think?
I think it's a cool concept. Whenever you have a history like the Kitchener Rangers do, or a lot of the teams in this league, it's, people are always wrapped up in nostalgia, and you see the banners and you see who had played there. And I think I get asked a fair bit. You probably do more than I do, but I get asked a fair bit about Kitchener Rangers history because people come to the building and they see, Paul Coffey, Larry Robinson, names like that. And then there's players that didn't necessarily go on to have that kind of NHL success that were fantastic Kitchener Rangers, and you and I rattled off just a bunch of those names recently. So there's this mix of, absolutely terrific OHL players and great NHL players too, but some of the NHL players had a very short stay. Their time in Kitchener was brief. At any rate, I think Brian Bellows and Peter DeBoer, you couldn't have nailed it better. Both are figures who were extremely prominent in the OHL and the NHL. They had both kind of ends of that career, and hard to argue with either one of them from the player side, from the coach's side. I think those two are on a pedestal for me. So I think they got it right.
I think they've done a lot of good things at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. They've got that Dave McClelland Hall of History that you can go in and take a look around when you're walking the concourse around the main bowl of the Memorial Auditorium. They've got all kinds of great pictures on wall. They've got a captain's wall. The thing I hear most about, Dan, are those beams that are under the seats for the upper bowl and names that are on there with numbers. I hear so much about that when people see a name that they didn't know was up there or just recognize the name from somewhere, doesn't matter what, but I hear so much about that. And you talk about the banners that are already hung inside where the rink is in the seating area, and the criteria there is, if you're in, for the most part anyway, the Hall of Fame, your and you played for the Kitchener Rangers, your banner goes up. And that's always been, look, this is going to be the challenge. I'll tell you right now, this is going to be the challenge. You've got a franchise now that's coming up on 65 years of history, 6 trips to the Memorial Cup, players that have gone on, won Stanley Cups, even if they didn't win Memorial Cups or OHL championships. It's just 65 years almost of history. And you talk to any fan in the Memorial Auditorium on any given Friday night, and they're going to rattle off 3, 4, 5, 10 of their favorite players that they think should be recognized some way, somehow. The big challenge with the level of legacy is going to be A, setting a criteria, and B, then adhering to it, because inevitably you're going to be leaving out some players that some fans will argue for and argue for vociferously.
Yeah, it reminds me of I saw a joke the other day. Someone said online, tell me what's your favorite album of all time and why did it come out when you were 16? And the premise was that we all have these memories that are in our formative years, and that musically when you're in your teens, late teens, everything seemed better then, and as you age you get different perspectives, but you always remember those years. And I think that's the same with hockey players. When we're remembering them, you think of the players that were really prominent during your formative years, right? And whatever that is for hockey, in your early to mid-teens to maybe your mid-20s. So everything's adjusted for era, and these debates will always rage about, oh, this player was better than this player, well, I saw this guy, believe me, he was better. And so it's really hard to get it right for a whole fan base with such a lengthy history, because you have fans that are 90 years old, have been coming since this team was born, and you've got fans who are relatively new, have only been here 4 or 5 years, and to them Jack Pridham's the best player they've seen. So it's really hard to get right, but I think and like you said, that history allows for a lot of healthy debate, but I think that's the point, isn't it?
Great point. And I love that line about your favorite album and why did it come out when you were 16. Fantastic. Here's a connecting thread that I can see between Pete DeBoer and Brian Bellows, and that is, naturally, they both won championships, OHL championships and Memorial Cup championships. So even if you take the OHL championship as the base for criteria here, just imagine, again, I'm going to show some bias, maybe some recency bias, but imagine a level of legacy with the Kitchener Rangers that does not include Gabriel Landeskog. I know he was a 2-year player, but come on, how would you not want to include, at least there would be an interest, I think, from many fans, certainly more modern fans, to include a guy like Gabriel Landeskog, but he didn't win an OHL championship in his 2 years here.
Yeah, and I guess that's a key part of the criteria, because I know when you pose that to me, I say, sure, Gabe Landeskog was a favorite, fan favorite. He's a terrific player. But if you were to ask me, even through that rough era, I mean, I could make an argument that Derek Roy was the more impactful junior and then went on to the NHL. Michael Richards. I mean, there's, even in that era, you're still getting a competition, I suppose. Jeff Skinner, I mean, terrific player. So you start to get names spinning in your head, and so I think you can make a case for a lot of them. But what are the criteria? Is it championships won? Is it individual records held? Is it number of years spent here? There's all these things. So I just think back to who were the most dynamic, entertaining players I ever remember seeing come through Kitchener, and those are the names that jump to my head, but those are pretty subjective criteria. So
Richards and Roy, of course, both won championships with the Kitchener Rangers. And if Mike Richards isn't on the level of legacy, I would be shocked as this grows in the years ahead. But great points, and it'll always be a talking point. And I think, as you said, that's kind of what you want with these things. But one little sidebar attached to this, and I think I might have mentioned this to you offline, Dan, but going back to the banners that are hung currently above the ice at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. And, a guy like Paul Coffey is up there, even though he played like 50 games or whatever it was with the Kitchener Rangers, but he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame, so it goes up. I think it's fair to say that it's virtually inevitable that Dale Hunter is going to pass Brian Kilrea for most coaching wins in Ontario Hockey League history. And that will almost certainly move Dale Hunter into the conversation of being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, where Brian Kilrea currently is as well. And that means, Dan Mahar, that the head coach of the London Knights will have his banner raised above the ice at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. I'm just going to put that out there for people to think about for a little bit, because Dale Hunter, of course, started his junior career as a Kitchener Ranger, traded to Sudbury, and then famously, I mean, as legend goes, the story is that Dale Hunter was so PO'd with the Kitchener Rangers that he swore he would some way, somehow get them back. And clearly, for the last 25 years, as the head coach in London, he's been doing just that. But even Don Cameron repeated that legend to me. So if it came from the great Don Cameron, whose banner is also hanging at the Memorial Auditorium, I'm going to take it for gospel.
All right, well, Dale, you've got your revenge. Enough.
The horse is dead. Stop beating it. The whistle went. Even if, anyway, we
I love it. Yeah, and I would I mean, it's a fair point, although, none of Dale Hunter's coaching exploits were for the Kitchener Rangers. So, I mean, that would probably be criteria enough to not raise his banner, but you're not totally wrong.
We talked last week on this podcast about expansion. Expansion, of course, for the Ontario Hockey League, when Commissioner Brian Crawford was talking about the plans to aggressively pursue expansion opportunities. Well, apparently it's not just the OHL that is pursuing expansion opportunities, Dan Mahar. Ryan Kennedy of the Hockey News is reporting that USHL Commissioner Glenn Hefferan says, count them, 13 groups are interested in USHL expansion franchises, including one in Canada. What do you make of this?
Well, I kind of got two takeaways from this. The first main takeaway is, well, obviously there's money in running these things, because there's people lining up for whatever league they can get their hands on. The second takeaway is this whole thing is somewhat like a chess game, is it not? You've got different players in different leagues, and they're all trying to make their move, and it's kind of sink or swim. And with all the threats to the USHL, with a lot of their players, a lot of their recruitment pipelines now being cut off by the fact these players can stay in Canada and play in the CHL before going to the NCAA, and the OHL making overtures at pulling in some of their franchises, what's your play? Well, your play might be to, whoa, we two can play at this game. We're going to start looking at some of your markets, and just, it's kind of like two dogs kind of nipping at each other in some regards. But I think those would be my takeaways, that this is a strategic play as much as anything, and that there's money to be made.
I think the latter point is the one that resonates most with me. Clearly, there is money to be made. And, it's funny. I was just talking with friends earlier today, not related to this podcast or even the game generally, or specifically, but in a general way, the conversation was about the importance of sports to, or as programming. When they watch TV these days, the most that they're watching is sports. This is the content that streaming services are looking for now. This is the content that the parent company of the radio station I work for, Rogers, is very interested in, because it can push that content onto the phones that you obviously have a Rogers plan, they hope, with that phone. So you're using their data, et cetera, et cetera. Sports is huge business. And I guess that trickles down even into leagues like the USHL, which as recently as a year ago, we were talking about being a league on the way out as the OHL swallows up everything.
Yeah, it's a fair point, that landscape with the media and streaming, and they're all clamoring for the same customer, right? And I guess that's the bottom line. And survival is the mode that most of these folks are in, and all looking for a new angle for it. So I think there's a lot of factors that go beyond what the casual fan might think when they hear and see these things, but you're absolutely right. And we know how Rogers has operated in the landscape of the Blue Jays and MLSE, and trying to basically have full control over that whole landscape, that whole picture. And these things go on at this level too. So I think there's a lot on the business side that drive these things that we're seeing.
All right. We have, of course, your usual look at every market in the Ontario Hockey League with the Wraparound coming up. We debut our prospects of the week for another season. And is the seat getting hot for Dave Cameron in Ottawa? We discuss that as well as we continue this week on the OHL podcast. NFL fans, what's your favorite touchdown? For me, It's the next one, because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. From first touchdown scorer to anytime TD props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. And here's the best part. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Look, if you need a sports betting app, DraftKings Sportsbook is the app for you. Your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. And we're into another week of the OHL season, and that means a little deeper, perhaps, we can get on our weekly wraparound to look at every market in the league. You, sir, are on Eastern Conference duty this week, so why don't you start us off in Barrie?
Barry, correct. Yeah. So
right.
just, yeah, a couple quick notes. Wanted to reference some players' early season performances. And Barry dropping one of those rivalry games with Owen Sound this weekend. And just noticed, the overage pickup Alex Asadurian is big piece of the puzzle for them offensively this year. A slow start for him with just 2 assists in 4 games. So hoping for Double A to get going for the Barrie Colts to have a shot at living up to their promise this year.
All right, I'm looking at an individual performance as well as I start my wraparound on the Western Conference with Erie, and I'm looking specifically at Gabriel Frasca, who scored his first 2 goals of the season, and those 2 goals gave the Otters their first win of the season. Frasca scored with about 4 minutes left in the third last Saturday to tie the game with London, and then added the OT winner as Erie came from behind to knock off the Knights.
And those Otters are hardworking. I'll give them that.
Sure are.
Another team that was not expected to do so well, Brampton. So far off to a decent start, 2-2 with a couple surprising wins. And you're looking for, well, is it going to go downhill from here? Well, I would suggest the 5% power play success rate so far is bound to go up. So we'll see. Those Steelheads firing okay so far.
Early season results, but hey, not terrible in Brampton like many thought. In Flint, I'll look at next. And last week I told you about Jax Pereira scoring the first goal of this OHL season. Well, you can make a note on this one as well for perhaps a future trivia question. The first suspension of this regular season. Firebirds' Christian Colosimo was handed a 1-game ban for going after Saginaw's Sebastian Gervais late in Flint's overtime win over the Spirit last week. Gervais was, let's just say, an unwilling combatant in that fight, and Colosimo got a 1-game suspension for it.
That was bound to happen. First one on the board.
There you go.
In Brantford, so I think, all the things going well for Brantford this year, one of which is their second overall import pick, Adam Benek. 4 points in your debut. Yeah, the rich get richer. Oh, and the rich get richer. What's even better? St. Louis Blues sending Adam Jurasek back to Brantford this weekend. So look out. Some worthy players already cut loose by that lineup because of how good they are, and just keeps getting better.
Benak, a little Tanner Lamb-esque with the between the legs goal on the weekend as well.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm looking at Guelph next, and you're just going to have to forgive the Storm if they're a little bit confused after the weekend. On Friday, they fire 49 shots on goal, but lose 7-1 to Oshawa. 24 hours later, it was the Storm scoring 7 goals in a win over Saginaw, and they needed just 27 shots on that night. As we say, junior hockey, baby. And Ilya Shabinsky scored his first OHL goal in that Storm win over Saginaw. So welcome to the OHL score sheet.
Absolutely. In Kingston, I know we were hit miss on where to predict them to come this year, and one of the things I wanted to see was how is Tomas Pobizal going to fit into that lineup. Well, I think he, Hopkins, and Battaglia are going to form actually one of the better first lines in the league. So it just question of will the depth come through, and can young Gavin Betts hold that team up in the goal crease? But fun first line.
Yeah, some firepower there for sure for the Fronts. In Kitchener, the Rangers named Cameron Reid their 60th captain in franchise history. Here's how it went down. Reid played an intra-squad game with Nashville, where he was at NHL camp last Thursday night, was told after that intra-squad game he'd be going back to the O. So he asked if the Predators could find him an early flight on Friday morning, which they did. An associate coach with the Rangers meets Reid at the airport in Toronto, gets him back to Kitchener in time so he can start the game last Friday night versus Erie with the C on his sweater.
And a worthy captain at that.
No question about it.
Moving down to Niagara, I've had a few folks reach out to ask, why are you predicting Niagara will do so well this year? What's different? I explained the aging of some of their core players into the sweet spot, but I'll also point out, league leading 82 penalty minutes for the Dogs so far this year, so maybe a little bit of a different philosophy they're imposing this year.
And Charlie Robertson with a shutout this weekend as well, so things looking pretty good so far in St. Kitts. All right, for London, I don't know about you, Dan, but people are asking me a lot of questions. I see some stuff online. People are having some fun with this. Look, we all know that the slow start will not last, but it is strange to see the Knights starting 0-4, and even stranger is that the Knights had a third period lead in 3 of those losses, but they could not hang on. They lost in overtime to Owen Sound and to Erie, and in regulation to Brampton when they had third period leads in all 3 games.
Dale will get that sorted out. We all know that.
No question.
Moving to North Bay, so I'm sure fans were licking their chops when they heard Protishin, Moses, Ride, and Amidovsky all returning to the lineup, and they lost. Which just goes to show sometimes these players coming back all in one batch, that really upsets the apple cart in your lineup for a bit until they get used to who they're playing with, get some practices under their belt. So this is the silly season early in the year where some of these additions and subtractions have the opposite effect you might think until players get accustomed.
All right, next in the West, I'm looking at the scenic city of Owen Sound, where I got to see the Renos up close. Rink looks nice, brighter lighting, new boards, new ice surface. The floor underneath was all redone. And the team with the most power play goals early in this OHL season is the Owen Sound Attack, with 7 in just 4 games, including 4 power play goals in the Attack's home opening win over Kitchener last Saturday. The Attack are now 4-0 to start the season, and their wins have not come against slouches, beating London, Kitchener, and Barrie twice. Owen Sound's power play, 2nd in the league. I know it's early, but listen, only Windsor is better on the power play, and Owen Sound finished 17th in power play percentage in the league last year.
Thought they might be a little better than most people were thinking. So
I do recall, Dan Mahar, you saying a dark horse team this year, Owen Sound Attack.
It's early, but yeah. Moving on to Oshawa, Mike, you already referenced the 7-1 victory over the Guelph Storm. What was unique about that game, as you referenced, almost 50 shots for the losing Guelph Storm. And Jaden Chillette picked up from London for a song for Oshawa to help solve their net problems. Stopped 48 of those 49 shots, so great start for him.
This is just a little bit of an oddity, I guess, maybe in Saginaw, but I love when patterns like this emerge. 4 games into the season, and the Spirit have one in every column. They've got a win, a loss, an overtime loss, and a shootout loss. So if you're a Spirit fan, you say points in 3 of 4, right? Saginaw has also allowed 21 goals in those 4 games, which is the most in the Western Conference.
Yeah, they've got some entertaining players.
They do.
Moving to Ottawa. So, Mike, you and I both in our preseason predictions said that they were going to be 3-0 with 16 goals for and 6 against, right?
Exactly what we said.
Exactly what we said. So there's
Go back and listen.
Nothing to see here.
We won't sound stupid at all.
Ottawa 67s are not making you and I look silly at all.
I will say this. I'm sure we mentioned that. Listen, they'll do it defensively, right? Because Dave Cameron coaches pretty solid defense. So 6 goals allowed. There you go.
Yeah, surprising start, but good for them.
All right, to Sarnia I go, and welcome to the win column, Patrick Quinlan, who made 27 saves and was named the first star of the game in Sarnia's 6-1 win over Sudbury last Friday. That was Quinlan's first OHL win. He was drafted by Sarnia in the 8th round back in 2023.
Yeah, and moving to Peterborough, how about the Feast or Famine Pete? So 4 games, 11 goals for, 10 of those goals in the 2 wins over Brampton. So pretty good output in those 2 games, pretty poor output in the other 2. So you roll the dice when you watch Peterborough Pete so far.
As I head north to the Sioux, I got to talk about a kid who is local to our region of Waterloo, Dan. And I don't mean Brady Martin from Elmira. I mean Jordan Sharon from Ayr, which is the same hometown as 2-time Stanley Cup winner Kyle Clifford. Sharon started his junior career in the GOHL with the Ayr Centennials, moved up to the Sioux in his 3rd season, which was last year, and then he picked up 10 goals in 48 games with the Greyhounds. Pittsburgh Penguins take him in the 5th round this summer, and now Sharon leads the Greyhounds in goals early this season. He's got 5 in his first 5 games.
Great start for him.
Certainly is.
And I'll wrap up the wraparound in Sudbury, Mike. And things have not gone swimmingly yet for the Wolves, but I think everyone knows that 2 huge pieces yet to make their debut. So Nathan Villeneuve still away at NHL camp, and Kieran Walton dealing with a bit of a concussion at Jets camp. So until those 2 come back healthy, ready to fire for the Wolves, we're not really going to get a great idea, but it shows how much they need them.
I was just going to say those very words. They need him, though, don't they? I was really expecting big things from Kieran Walton this year for sure.
Oh, for sure. He was a contender for the league scoring championship if things went well. Yeah.
All right, one more for me on the western side, and it is in Windsor. Beck-Sultan McKish, Gesundheit. The Spitfires rookie has 5 goals through his first 4 games as Windsor starts 4-0. Now, the caveat here is we are recording as Windsor is playing its final game of the weekend. But either way, Beck-Sultan McKish from Kazakhstan was Windsor's 2nd-round import pick this summer. He is off to a torrid start. And just let this sink in as you get used to saying the name Beck-Sultan McKish or McKish. My apologies, I haven't figured it out yet. But he spent the past 2 seasons with the Boston Hockey Academy, where he scored an absolutely ridiculous 150 goals in 130 games. 150 goals in 130 games, and the Spits get him in the 2nd round of the import draft.
Yeah, and
is that good? Out of curiosity,
from the highlights I've seen, the kid's a magician. So not the stature of Protus, but he can put the puck in the net.
All right, we've got emails coming in from Ottawa questioning whether or not Dave Cameron's contract should be extended as he's into the final year of his deal. Plus, the Joey Castanzo story that is really less about Joey and more about somebody who inspired him, and your prospects of the week still to come. So stay with us on this week's episode of the OHL Podcast. All right, Dan, let's go to the email inbox. Orhan sends an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Orhan checking in, roll call from Ottawa. Thank you for that. And thoroughly enjoys going to the games. Obviously was disappointed the way things went for the 67s last year and was curious. Now into the final year of his contract, does this put Dave Cameron in the hot seat in any way if the 67s don't perform? My initial instinct on that, Dan, would be, listen, we already predicted that it's going to be a rough season no matter what, given the graduations from Ottawa, etc. But maybe with the 3-0 start, Dave Cameron should get on the phone to GM James Boyd and say, let's talk extension. Now's the time. Strike while the iron is hot. What do you think of the coaching situation in the nation's capital, Dan?
There's a lot of angles to this one. And, I think Dave Cameron is the latest example of, be careful what you sign up for, kids, when you agree to coach Team Canada at the World Juniors, because your reputation can go either way after that. And, I think he's had a few shots at that team. And most recently, I know fans, there was a lot of disappointment with how Team Canada performed last year, and it called Dave Cameron's abilities into question. The 67s didn't have a great year last year. A lot of kind of rebuilding, turning over a new leaf. So he was forgiven that, but it looks like this season likely will be a bit more of the same, even though the start has been hot. So I think it's fair. I think it's fair to call into question, because I think a lot of these coaches, have long tenure. A lot of them rack up some impressive win totals, but, sometimes you check the loss column, that's pretty impressive, pretty high as well. So the overall premise of questioning, is Dave Cameron the right guy to get this team over the hump, is totally fair. And sometimes when coaches have been around a long time, they lose touch with how to connect with these players, and as they get younger and younger, as the coaches get older and older, and Dave Cameron has his limitations. There's definitely some curious decisions at times about who plays and who plays with who, and sticking with certain schemes that aren't necessarily working. So, but it's like you just said, in a contract year, just like players want to pull out all the stops, and so far things are going well for the 67. So we're certainly not saying Dave Cameron's not a good coach. But I think it's totally fair to question, is this the right guy to carry forward beyond this year?
And of course, we know that coaches at virtually every level are hired to be fired. And sometimes the players in the room or the organization more generally gets tired of that particular voice. Heck, we were talking earlier about the Kitchener Rangers level of legacy, and Pete DeBoer, the inaugural inductee, who will be enshrined at a game in November, just about 6 weeks from now. And he's currently out of work in the National Hockey League after taking teams to the conference finals like 6 times.
It's crazy, right? The hired to be fired is so true. It sounds like a cliche, but it's so true. I mean, very few coaches get out of it unscathed. I mean, the odd one graduates to a higher league without ever being fired or retires. But most coaches have several firings on their. And it was getting scary recently. If you looked at average tenures, they were shrinking and shrinking and shrinking down to that 2 to 3 year range. And once you start firing coaches after every 2 or 3 years, I think it's fair to say you're probably not giving them a fair shot. So yeah, hired to be fired for sure.
We reminded you at the beginning of this episode of the OHL podcast of the Joey Castanzo story from a year ago when he ended up signing his goal stick for a fan in a visiting building when he was in Brantford. It was a great story shared with us from a Brantford fan, which I think made it all the more special. Well, how about this latest story connected to Joey Castanzo? If you didn't know, Mr. Goalie himself, Glenn Hall, yes, that Glenn Hall, the NHL goaltender who played more than 500 consecutive games, most of them with the Detroit Red Wings. But Glenn Hall is also a former Windsor Spitfire. He's a Saskatchewan boy, Hall is. Started with the Humboldt Indians, then came over to the Windsor Spitfires before being drafted into the National Hockey League by Detroit. Glenn Hall's banner hangs in the WFCU Center as alumni. So if you're a young goaltender like Joey Castanzo, who better to look to for some inspiration than Glenn Hall? So what Castanzo does as he's looking at that banner, decides I'm going to get my mask done up in a Glenn Hall kind of style, an homage to Mr. Goalie Glenn Hall. And the Hall family got wind of this. And the next thing you know, 93-year-old Mr. Goalie himself is signing Joey Castanzo's goalie mask. And even more than that, sending words of encouragement when Castanzo got a shot with the Flyers at a rookie camp earlier this year. Just an incredible connection to one of the great NHL goaltenders for the overage netminder in Windsor right now. I don't know. I can't say enough about how cool I think that story is.
Well, the story is extremely cool. And, I think to see a teenager or a kid, a young man, I know Joey Costanzo's now an overager, but have that connection to the history, but also to the community. And I thought, the story you referenced last year in Brantford, following into this story, what it tells me is you've got a bit of a kid who's a bit of a thinker, a bit of a cerebral kid. And, when I just finished watching the Ryder Cup this weekend and we saw some of the ridiculous behavior out there, and I will always, always, always err on the side of class. I want my athletes to be classy. I want my people in my life to be classy. And I think that Joey Castanzo exhibits that in spades, right? And you hear these stories and they start to surface and you see these kids around the league that, are always taking pictures with the fans and they're connecting with all generations, old, young, doesn't matter. They understand the importance of their role and the importance of these years they're going to spend in the OHL and what the role model they are in the community. And part of that is linking to the past as well as the future, not just for the kids, but those who have gone before them. So anyway, I just love this story, but I mean, it speaks of the class that Joey Castanzo has and many of the kids in this league. It's beyond their years.
When you mention pictures, I just have to go back to Friday night, this past Friday at the Memorial Auditorium. Cameron Reed, who got one of the stars, came out and then went back down the tunnel and came out a second time just so he could take a picture with the kids who were out at center ice handing out the 3-star awards, which I thought was pretty nice. Something must have happened that he knew those kids wanted a picture or something like that. And then fast forward 24 hours and I'm with the team in Owen Sound, walk out to get back on the bus and there's a crowd of fans there and these little kids wanted a picture, or did they ask for an autograph? Either way, with Cameron Reed. And he very politely explained, I just have to drop this on the bus. I'll come right back. And so, into the bus he goes, does what he needs to do, comes right back out. And I saw him posing for pictures and chatting with the fans, the parents, the kids, etc. And I guess that's what you do when you wear a C on your sweater and people are interested in spending a little bit of time with you, even after a tough loss on the road for Cameron Reed in this case. But it's not unique. to Cameron Reid. You mentioned Joey Costanzo. We know there are players on every team doing these things because it matters to the young fans in the communities where they play. Simple as that.
100%. And to understand that, and the Cameron Reid story you just told, like you said, it's after a tough loss. They didn't play particularly well. A lot of those kids were probably pretty pissed off heading onto that bus. So, I'm a believer in that character is revealed in the tougher times, right? When you have every excuse to just shut the bus doors, curl up on your seat, and put the headphones in. No, I got a duty here. It means something to these kids that have stood out here. I'm going to overcome my own personal emotions and depression in this moment and go do what I do, which is show class at all times. And that's can't be impressed enough with these kids that manage to find that within them, because they're not old people. They're not people who have learned that there are more important things yet. So to understand that age is just so impressive.
I think one more interesting connection to this Glenn Hall story with Joey Costanzo, as we bring it back to that, is Glenn Hall was a Windsor Spitfire 75 years ago. He was a Windsor Spitfire, but some way, somehow, that connection to the junior franchise remains. And that's how the word gets back to him. And he wants to sign the mask and send the picture and send encouraging texts to Joey Costanzo. But all these decades later, 75 years after Glenn Hall played the game without a mask, he's still connecting to a player from his junior team all that time ago. I think it speaks to the relationships that you build in this game of hockey generally. And those, I don't think, what we say, Dan, once a Ranger, always a Ranger. Once a Spitfire, always a Spitfire. Once a Knight, always a Knight. Once a Pete, always a Pete. It just goes on and on from there. And I actually think that is precisely the case.
Oh, 100%. And I think part of it is these players understand now what it takes to get there, right? These players, so a kid like Joey Costanzo's been in the league for how many years now? He knew what it took from the time he was 4 or 5 years old to get to this level, and then probably sees how much more it takes to get to the next level, which is what Glenn Hall did. So I think with all these players, it's a fraternity across the years, right? They understand, there's an instant respect that you extend to your brethren when you know they've achieved this and what it took to get there. So I think it's fantastic to see that across so many decades.
2 weeks into this OHL season, and that means, of course, Dan and I know exactly who the top prospect from the OHL, who will go first from the OHL in the NHL draft next June. We know this already, or not, but what we do at the end of every episode of the OHL podcast is share with you our prospect of the week. So the NHL draft eligible player that caught our attention this week. Dan, who caught yours?
So a guy who I was probably going to name had you asked me as the favorite for Rookie of the Year, and that is Mr. Caleb Malhotra in Brantford. Just a specimen of a player, wasn't committed to come to the OHL till the rules changed, dealt to Brantford, and just, the preseason looked fantastic. 8 points through his first 3 games, looking like a key cog in that lineup already, despite his young age. So my guy for this week is Malhotra.
It's funny, Dan, that you say that, because as I did the work for my prospect of the week this week, I came up with the same name. And I said to myself, listen, Caleb Malhotra is going to be too easy to pick week in and week out, right? So I'm going to dig a little deeper next time. But how could you overlook the points in every game, the 8 points in 3 games that you mentioned? And let's not forget, this is a guy that had just 8 goals all of last year with the Chilliwack Chiefs in the BCHL. So 8 points in 3 games, 8 goals all of last year. Caleb Malhotra, I think, caught more than just our eye this week, Dan Mahar.
Yeah, absolutely worthy candidate, and probably remiss not to give a slight nod to his teammate Cooper Dennis for his role in some of that offense. Just a fantastic pairing added into an already potent lineup. But yeah, you're going to hear a lot about son of Manny Caleb all year, as he's going to follow his dad's footsteps, but probably with a little more offensive potency as well.
We are getting stars returned to the Ontario Hockey League. Teams are shoring up and jockeying for position even just 2 weeks in. As the saying goes, we have only just begun, and we're so glad you're with us. That man over there is Dan Mahar. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, tell a friend, and send us an email anytime, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. We love interacting with the OHL community, and we'll be back in 1 week's time here on the OHL podcast.